Awesome. Well, look, we decided that we'd take a bit of time to basically get to introduce ourselves a little bit as well. Like, we do have a lot of people that come on board and we sort of have a discussion with them, but I thought it'd be great to take a chance and spend some time and get to learn a bit about JB, and over the coming weeks or months, we can do the same with me. So JB and I have been connected with this since basically the start of the year, and it's been really good to get to know Jonathan and understand some of the work that he does. But I'm really interested to listen to a bit of the motivation behind why he does what he does. But before we get there, JB, I want to start off with whitewater rafting. I was pretty impressed to see that on your resume. Tell us about whitewater rafting and what got you into that.
Right. Basically a bit of a vagrant when I finished school. Didn't really know what I wanted to do. I lucked into a job with an outdoor organisation, actually working in their ski fields in cross-country ski camp, and don't like the cold very much, but they had a whitewater raft guide training course in the springtime, and yeah, that was in end of 86. I did that and spent 12-13 years pretty much rafting, sea kayaking, doing a bit of adventure tourism in Vietnam on mountain bikes, a few things like that. But finished that part of my career here in Tassie. I came down to Rafter Franklin and met my wife-to-be on my second last trip, and haven't really left Tassie since.
Bit of a love story, mate. Look, one of the things I'd like to ask you about the rafting is that obviously when rafting, there's obviously a high level of risk that's involved. How do you deal with the negative thoughts that come around with risk, particularly if you're guiding other people?
Great question. I think a lot of it actually in the rafting world is about perceived risk versus actual risk. And on most commercial rivers, the perceived risk is what you're paying for, along with a guide. The actual risk is often not that high, especially in more recent times. I think in early days of rafting, it probably was a bit more risky, but the technology of the equipment and things really improved over time. So that's a part of the interesting thing with rafting and probably a lot of sports. In terms of managing myself, I guess I think it's really about practice, I would say. I think in my early days of my rafting career, there was a fair bit of ignorance is bliss, not really understanding what could go wrong, and soldering on through rapids and getting stuck on rocks and flipping boats upside down and things. But you learn pretty quick, when you're in the drink and on the job. So, but then it becomes a matter of practice, and I think it didn't take that long to get a really good sense of how things actually move. You can do your training course in a raft with a bunch of skilled paddlers, and that's great, but it's a whole other thing taking novices out, and so you learn pretty quickly. And obviously you start on safer, more gentle rivers as well. But yeah, for me, it was about getting comfortable in the space. I think was a big part of it.
Sounds like a very transferable set of skills. JB, I want to jump to a part in your life and a part that's focused on this network. So obviously this is the National Men's Lived Experience of Suicide Network, and part of that we all come to this with our own lived experiences. I wonder if you could take us to where in your life, like your first lived experience of suicide came from, and just set the scene for us.
Yeah. So for me, I think I've had a pretty privileged life, overall. When I moved to Tassie, I certainly struggled a little bit, in trying to transition from that career to a new life. I definitely was pretty clear that I'd had enough being an adventure tourism guide, and I wanted something different. It took me a few years to figure out what I wanted to do, and then at the same time had a family and became a father. That was probably a really key thing for me. Becoming a father was just, I think that changes things for a lot of us. It's a bit of a reality check and forces you to grow up, if that's what happens when you become a father. I'm not sure about that.
You definitely grow up.
In some ways.
So we're told.
Yeah. But then one of the jobs I got, I sort of worked in various community sector organisations for a while, and I ended up in a job starting a men's shed, which was actually a paid gig. There was not many men's sheds, particularly in those days, that had any paid opportunities. And very quickly, within the first few days of starting the shed, a bunch of guys walked through the door, and it was pretty clear pretty quickly you needed some men's health information in there. And I went looking for it, and it was almost non-existent. And what I did find was generally out of date and badly organised in a dishevelled office belonging to an organisation that called itself a men's health and wellbeing organisation, but didn't have any staff, no funding, and just an old crusty bloke doing his PhD without really any interest in helping anyone. So it really got me thinking at that stage, okay, well, there's just this massive gap. How come there's no stuff out there supporting men? And then got involved in men's groups, did lose someone who I was connected to in a men's group to suicide, which was pretty confronting at the time, of course. And then through work over the years, I ended up in a men's health policy role with the Tasmanian Health Department. Having started a network when I was in the shed, I used to meet with a bunch of other service providers, men and women, but people who had a responsibility to focus on men in their roles. And we would all meet a couple of times a year, sit around, talking about, well, how the hell do we do this? Where can we get some training? Why is this so hard? Et cetera, et cetera. And so ended up in a policy role because the opportunity came up, and we pushed really hard to make sure that happened. And then one of the challenges I felt in the government position was that actually what was needed was an organisation on the outside to sort of bang on the door saying, come on, government, where is stuff for men's health? And so that's where I've ended up getting involved with starting Men's Resources Tasmania, and eventually joining the board of AMHF and playing different roles with AMHF. And it was all about this idea that there's just not, I felt like there was just this massive gap of support, information, resources for men, dads, boys, et cetera, et cetera.
So if you were to take us back to when this all started, when was this? Like, sort of what year was it?
Yep. So I started the Men's Shed in 2005, and I joined the government in a health policy role in 2007. I think it must have been late 2007, and finished there in 2014. We'd started the network before that, but it became Men's Resources Tasmania in 2015 when we incorporated. But that's largely been a volunteer thing.
Okay.
We get paid for the occasional thing where we can convince someone to give us some money, but mostly it's a volunteer thing.
So in the early days, I'm just wondering if you could take us through the challenges and even some successes of going from starting something up and realizing, hey, there's nothing here, to where you're in a place where you're developing things and getting things implemented around the place. What was that journey like?
Look, it was challenging because a lot of us felt like a lot of people like me who are on the front line in some way of working with men felt like we were alone within our organisations. We might have been part of a fairly good sized organisation of 120 people in the one I worked for, but nobody had any particular skills or thoughts about working with men. It wasn't really considered that you needed to think differently about that. So getting together with other people in the same boat was just brilliant, because we could have a bit of a moan about things, get things off our chest, but also share ideas about what was working. And so we found it really beneficial just to meet 2 or 3 or 4 times a year for peer support, really, as much as anything. But then we arranged some training on a couple of occasions. We collaborated on some events. We ran a sexual health thing in Men's Health Week called Have You Got the Balls, to get a sexual health check for young guys. That was really great. And yeah, and we contributed to a couple of policy discussions. And actually, when the position that I ended up in the health department came up, they weren't going to fill it. They'd had somebody in the role and they weren't going to fill it. And we were able to lobby and put the case pretty hard that they needed to do that. They needed to have the position filled. And then I ended up getting it. So that was an important thing, I think, for us to realise that actually that group of people on the outside of government pushing the government to do certain things did make a big difference. And I actually think it probably made more of a difference than when I was in there. Yeah.
And what do you think that was? Is it that it's grassroots, that like it's centered in lived experience?
Yeah. I think it's that it was grassroots. It was also fairly representative. There was, quite a number of people from different organisations that were funded, counsellors from Relationships Australia. There was people from sexual health clinics, government funded mental health nurses and community health nurses, and people, male and female. Yeah, I mean, there was a bit more money back then in government. There's been an awful lot of cuts since then. So, yeah. But to my way of thinking now is that we need both. We need somebody in the government. We don't have that anymore. That position did end up ceasing. We don't, and we really need somebody on the inside of government pushing, driving a men's health message. But then we need somebody on the outside, and that's where Men's Resources Tasmania is again having a few wins at the moment. We've been advocating really hard on a new suicide prevention strategy that's been developed and trying to push to get more focus on men.
That's great, buddy. And just wondering, along that journey, it sounds like a pretty daunting task. I'm just wondering if you'd just take us through, like, what was the biggest fear that you had to overcome, or the biggest challenge along the way?
Not really any fears as such, although sometimes if you want to get into discussions around family violence, that's not very comfortable. But I tend to probably avoid that these days. It's a bit fraught. Mm-hmm. But the challenges have been getting people to do stuff, to be honest. Men's Resources Tas has been very key person dependent on me for the last number of years. That's changing now, but whilst there was an initial agreement from people, a bunch of us agreed we needed to incorporate and set up a proper organisation. When it came to the doing, it kind of didn't really happen. It landed on my doorstep. And so the learning for me out of all that is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with others. And probably in the early years, I didn't push for, I did too much without bringing others on board. And I should have just not done so much, but made sure there was other people involved.
So out of all the work you've been doing and getting things set up and the progress you've made, what are you most proud of?
I'm pretty proud of 4 or 5 years ago, when the Black Dog Institute and other associated organisations were setting up trial sites around the country. And I managed to get myself on a working group with the Primary Health Network here in Tassie, who were responsible for the trial sites here, and managed to get men. There were 3 target audiences, and I managed to make sure that men were 2 of them, essentially. Men generally, middle-aged men, and then people 65 and over, because there's a bit of a issue in sort of the over 65s generally in Tassie. So I really felt like I was able to get men recognised in that space. It's still incredible that you go to meetings around suicide prevention stuff and you say, what are we doing about men? You know, it's 3/4 of the problem. And I feel like people, they get it, you know, they know the numbers, but they don't understand that it means thinking differently from what we've been doing. So, yeah, so that was a win. I think we've had a win recently with the new strategy. It's still in consultation. They're still refining a final draft, or a final version, but we've managed to remind the government that men are actually, you know, 4 out of 5 suicides in Tassie. They hadn't really picked that up in their target populations. And they've said they're going to put an implementation plan together focused on men underneath the overarching strategy. So, and we've had some meetings to actually look at what that might look like, which is exciting.
It is really exciting, and it's brilliant to have that in place. Just wondering, it sounds like you've sort of described collaboration and doing things together is a real key to make success. What tips do you have in terms of collaborating to do that, to really strengthen relationships? Because there's a lot of people in this meeting that do a lot of community work and are quite involved in their communities, and we all have challenges along the way trying to connect with people. So just wondering, what's some things that you could share with us?
Yeah, so my most recent job until about a year ago was working with neighbourhood houses, community centres, they're often known as, and they operate very much from a community development model, which I really like. And I think there's good lessons for us in terms of the grassroots men's wellbeing movement. And that is that, you know, really the first thing to do is to listen and ask questions, you know, and if you want to start something in a community, I mean, as I say, if you can start, you know, put all your own energy and resources and effort in, and that's great if that's what you want to do. But if you actually want you want to change community, or you want to bring other people with you, I think the first thing is to go in and ask questions, share information, you know, throw in some challenging facts. You know, I think to go into some meetings and say, well, yeah, 4 out of 5 suicides in Tassie, unfortunately, are male. Why? You know, and just leave it hanging. Why is it not going down? Why are all the services that we've been funding for the last number of years not seeming to change that? Yeah. And then to, you know, follow up with, so who wants to do something about this? And it's hard, I think, to then say to not put forward what I want to do. Because as soon as I put forward what I want to do, then it's very easy for everybody else to say, great, go for it. Good on you, JB. Go hard, brother. And you're on your own. But actually, if everybody else can come up with the ideas, either they may be the same, they may be different. It doesn't really matter. But if other people come up with the ideas, they're far more likely to be invested in getting involved in them, or they feel some ownership over them. So, yeah, I guess being wary about being the yes man all the time. It's a massive lesson. I'm still learning. I'm not very good at it.
I see John Eddie smiling there. He's a bit of that himself. He's constantly learning now that he's on the books with Roses in the Ocean. He's had to say no to a few things. But look, it sounds great. Like, I call it sort of the egalitarian principle, and really distributing that power balance to say, hey, look, I'm not the expert, but
Yeah.
we're here to work together.
Yeah.
John, you come off mute. Have you got something to say, buddy?
I'm not allowed to be political anymore. That's always a bit disappointing.
It's so good. Now, JB, you touched on the fact that a lot of this shifted around becoming a dad. Just wondering if you could talk to us about how being a dad, how that connects with your work and how it drives you to do what you do, and how your work also comes out in how you parent.
So I do remember a time very early in being a dad, taking my boy down to the park. One of the first times I took him down to the park, pushing him on the swings, and just feeling really self-conscious, in a space which, I don't know, even then, it's not that long ago, but I felt like, it's probably, again, a perception thing rather than a reality, but I felt like, oh, here's a bloke in a playground with a child. That's a, dangerous thing. And I very quickly corrected myself, and said, no, don't be stupid. But I did feel that, and it did sort of, it did compel me, I think, in some of my work since then, to be mindful of, what is men's place. And, the reality, we hear all the terrible stories in the news, but, when you look at the big picture and actually look at stats and things, the world's a much safer place than it used to be.
Definitely. And the words you use there, men's place, that's something that is quite topical as well, like men's place in terms of, you look at masculinity, men's place in terms of the political scene, men's place in terms of working in the sector of suicide prevention and community services. What are your comments on that? Where do you see men's place being within those?
Look, it's a good question. I think, our place is everywhere, just like women's place is everywhere. We need to have, I think we're missing one side of the coin in the gender discussions that happen in the broader community. It's starting to change, but we often hear about creating more opportunities for women to participate in male-dominated workplaces, and I think that's fantastic. I think we should do that. It's a no-brainer, but I don't think we hear the same in terms of creating opportunities for men to inhabit the female-dominated spaces, nursing, childcare, teaching. We know that less than 20% of primary school teachers are men, and I think there's a real opportunity there that a lot of kids don't have positive male role models in their lives because they're estranged from their father, or mum and dad are broken up and they're not getting as much time with their dad as they might like. I think we need, to address some of those sorts of factors too. So it's kind of a risky space to be in sometimes. For me, it's not at all about being anti-women or, wanting to take anything away from women. Don't want to reduce funding to women's causes or anything like that. It's to me, it's just a missing part of what might actually help with the women's cause as well. That, creating more spaces in male-dominated workplaces for women will happen if we create more spaces in female-dominated workplaces for men.
Great. And so within Tasmania and the work that you've been doing, what would be the best outcome that you could see for the next 5 years in terms of in that space with growth within the industry or programs? What would be the thing for you?
Well, I really want to see Men's Resources Tasmania funded to some degree. You know, if we could get, well, we've started some programs recently where we are developing a coaching and mentoring program for men engaged in the justice or correction system, to try and give them some real life skills and life support when they come out of jail, or to help them avoid going to jail. So to get that funded would be good. I think we're just going ahead and doing it. We're not waiting around for funding because it's just been so difficult. But hopefully we can demonstrate positive outcomes with that fairly quickly and get some funding for it. But to my way of thinking, we need money for a peak body in Tassie. We've got a fantastic peak body at a national level, but we really need a state-based peak as well that can connect all the local people, because there's quite a few down here in Tassie working at that grassroots, often volunteers, that we can play that role of bringing everybody together, supporting each other, creating training, sharing resources, working together, that sort of thing. So that would be a big win if we could get some funding for us as a peak body. And then also maybe a round of grants that target male men in the population. So any organisation potentially could apply for the grants, but the condition being, you know, Men's Health Week, maybe activities to actually meet men where they're at in ways they want to be met, with positive strength-based messaging to men, not just change your behaviour. Actually, how are you, fellas, and how can we help you, kind of approach.
I'd love to see that replicated across the country as an outcome and as an action area for the way forward. JB, I want to come to self-care. How do you look after yourself, mate? You do a lot, and you wear many hats, and you carry sometimes it looks like a heavy burden. So how do you look after you?
Not as well as I should. But what I love to do is get in the water. I've got a few mates that I do the Wim Hof practice with on a weekend. On the Saturday morning, we go have a breath session down the beach and then have a swim, which during the winter down here is pretty enlivening. If you're not dead, you know you're alive. But it's great. I love it. And I'm anything on the water really, based because of my history. But mountain biking is probably where I get a bit of adrenaline. I think I do have an adrenaline addiction from my rafting days. And I think that's actually partly what feeds my work in Men's Health as well. And sometimes being willing to get into difficult conversations, I think there's an adrenaline that goes with that. So I've got to be a bit mindful of that, because definitely risky behaviour in that space, I think.
And just like last time we came together, there was that question for Steve, like, is any, what did I ask? Like, are there such thing as a healthy addiction? And yeah, I sort of look at my hobbies and stuff too with a different lens now as well. Look, JB, it's been great to get to know you a little bit more. And I'll just throw it out. If anyone in the group has any questions for JB, feel free to put your hand up or put it in the chat.
Jonathan, I'm just a bit confused. I've been, because of the breakdown in and out, what do you actually do to earn a living? You seem to be involved in everything, but I'm not quite sure what your job is.
Yeah, so I started a business just over 12 months ago, doing mental health first aid training, suicide prevention training, and then other bits and pieces of consultancy. So I do a little bit of part-time work for AMHF, which kind of fills in the gaps sometimes. And then, a few different things, mostly in the mental health space or suicide prevention or men's focus. Yeah.
But a number of the organisations that you're involved with that you've been talking about today, you're in a volunteer space.
With Men's Resources Tasmania, I am mostly, although this year been running some workshops in male dominated workspaces and charging for those. And so I've been getting paid for those. So yeah, I'm sort of slowly finding a way to make money out of the men's stuff as well. So it's good.
That's good, because one of the problems we have in the lived experience space is everyone wants us for nothing, and they don't value our input as such. I'm sick of getting $50 vouchers to go to Coles with instead of being. Thank you for that.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks, Graham.
Over to
Hey,
you,
Glenn.
Glenn.
Yeah, thanks, John. That was really interesting, and I really agree with what you were saying about the lack of men in, so many aspects of what we do. I had a chance earlier this year to go up to Wollongong Uni and speak with all of the Masters of Psychology students regarding lived experience. And again, out of 32 students, there was only 2 males.
Yeah.
And I look at a number of the services around our region, down here in the valley, and I think probably out of 24 or 24 staff across all services, there would only be three males.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I work hand in hand with Headspace based down here, and they comment on the fact that they have no engagement with young men after the age of 16. They can't engage them, and they're trying to figure out why. And the only male in their entire office is the lead clinician. All the rest are women, and they wonder why they can't engage, young men.
Yeah.
So there is a real lack and a real lack of men coming through in the industry, and it's a concern. It really is. So
it's a real concern, and for those young guys, another young bloke, maybe a slightly older bloke, 24, 25-year-old, could be awesome, but also, maybe it is an older man who's had some good life experiences. I'm sure most of them would, really benefit from something like that and would like to be able to have that opportunity. It's kind of frustrating that services just don't seem to realise that. That's what I find bizarre, is why do we have to actually point this out? But we do.
Yeah. I don't have an answer, but it is something that we, is out there, but there doesn't seem to be an answer. Like you were saying with looking at men as figures, they don't want to look at it. It seems to be too hard for them to try and address it, so they just shrug their shoulders and accept it.
Yeah. The other thing I want to make the point really briefly, women can be great supporters for men or can provide great services. So it's not about women not being able to do it. Sometimes they might benefit from some training, just like we all do in different spaces, but it's just practically speaking, I'm sure most women on many issues would rather speak to a woman. It's just the same for blokes.
Definitely.
Pat, I reckon you are next there, mate.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what's been said, really. And this is something I always bang on about in the workplace, is that, I'm always one male in about 40 women. And even when it comes to recruiting, we get kind of, large numbers of applicants and very few are male. So it's kind of, it feels like it's a bit of a vicious cycle. How do we, if we can't encourage men to speak up in their personal lives, why would they want to talk about vulnerability in a professional space as well? And it just seems to be this cycle that just we can never find the right gap to actually make a space where, because I think men do a lot of amazing work in community services. I've worked in mental health and disability before I worked in postvention, and some of the males that were there had these amazing connections with young men in the space, and it's such a shame that it isn't an attractive job for so many men.
Great point there, Pat. And that's one of the things that we're looking to achieve through this network is connecting men who are in the sector, and rather than just have one voice, a collective voice to actually do things and advocate and make some changes and come together and support each other as well.
Yeah.
Paul, over to you.
Thank you. In admiration of what you do, Jonathan, it's as Graham said, we all fight and battle, but we all do it out of the kindness of our heart and not our back pocket. Just some observations, and I'd be interested in feedback from yourself, but also from everyone else. One of the things that frustrates me to the point of anger at times is that, and it's come through in the budget last night, is we literally spend billions of dollars every bloody year on mental health, suicide prevention, and all the supplementary arenas. And yet all I've ever seen over the last 10, 12 years is just so many goddamn reports. And I've got a room full of them here. I try and read the bloody things. And they all say the same things over and over. To add weight to that is that I live in a regional area. I live in Bundaberg, so probably like yourself down there. We are the forgotten people. So it's bad enough for me in a regional area. I feel bad for those people in rural and remote areas. We don't have access. I don't have access to a psychiatrist or psychologist. It's all done by telehealth. And I'm so sorry, you can't build a report. You can't feel comfortable. You can't create that safe space from a bloody television screen, or it just doesn't work. So that's my first observation, is that I am extremely frustrated by the amount of money that is spent at both federal and state, and we duplicate and triplicate and quadruplicate right throughout. I'd much prefer that, and I don't have an answer yet on how we can streamline this, and less talking, more walking out there. The second point is that, and I wholeheartedly agree with what you're saying about male representation. I work across with my lived experience across suicide prevention, mental health, NDIS, and musculoskeletal committees. I'm one of the very few males that have representation or a voice amongst there. And whenever I speak up, and I know Tiernan will avow to this, that I sometimes suffer verbal diarrhea, and when I get going, I tend to talk a lot, but I'm very passionate about it. But I get this sense, and I've had people, I've had other people say to me, you're too intimidating, Paul. I'm offended by what you've just said. And I'm just, oh, well, you know what? I'm offended that you're offended. Sorry, this is just my opinion. I'm not shoving it down your throat. Stop looking at me as this bloody intimidating, ugly, scary male. I'm someone that has lived experience that just wants to share and help and just help other males out there. And as you said, it is so frustrating that we don't have the lived experience peers out there for other males, and it's not just males, but specifically males. And when you look at the suicide stats, and then there was a report that came out the other day that the forgotten group is that sort of 14 to 25 age group, and predominantly males in there. That there's so little work, so little understanding, because as you said, they don't have role models to talk to, and I don't think aid really comes into it. Whether it's an old fart like me who's got a lot of battle scars, we've also got a lot of empathy and a lot of insight to be able to sit, listen, and challenge those people. And I had an argument with one of my specialists the other day, and he was having a go at me about one of my medical conditions. He said, "Look, you've got to understand, Paul. I've got 6 years of training here." And I said, "Buddy, I've got 45 years of excuse my French. I've got 45 years of lived experience. Sorry, I think my hand outweighs yours. I know my body, I know my mind far better than you do. Maybe it's time you started to listen to what I'm saying rather than what your textbook says." Anyway, I wholeheartedly agree. I sense the same frustrations. You're probably being very politically correct. I'm very politically incorrect because I much prefer to call a spade a spade.
I think we need both. We need people who can call a spade a spade. One of the things, to sum up in a way some of what you just talked about, is this idea that the community sector, all the services out there talking about, we hear it a lot, men need to talk more. But then when we do talk, you don't like what we have to say. Yeah, there's a bit
because
of
of that stigma of males, of, you know, like
Yeah.
a very small percentage of what they perceive us to be.
yeah. So it's a simplistic thing, but there is something in that. So yeah, there's a couple of other hands up.
Tony, over to you.
Yeah.
Thanks. Jonathan, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Good, because the last time I tried it, we didn't work. I love the work you do. I love the way you present it in terms of the community development model. The thing that sticks in my mind in terms of what you said was when you just touched on that area of stopping violence work, particularly domestic violence, and how this is it's a difficult area for us to work in. As you know, I do a lot of work in that area.
Yeah.
The thought that comes to me on this one is that violence can be either external or internal. But suicide is when the violence is directed inwards.
Absolutely.
It is just the other side of the same coin.
I agree. Yeah.
And that and just as we find with people who have a problem with violence and aggression, it often goes with addictions. And it can also go with that kind of isolation. But what we've got is a holistic problem. And that what I'm concerned about is the way in which we are currently talking about putting more money into mental health, primarily by funding professionals, not by funding the kind of community development stuff, which makes it more available to deal with the wide range of issues that men face in their lives that so often leads them to tip over into that self-harm approach. I think I've touched on in another area when we started the Men's Shed Eltham Inner Workshop, which is where we sort of men's group together. We ended up with 5 guys in the room disclosing how they'd all had direct experience of being sexually abused as children, and how this really had led them to deal with suicidal thinking and a whole load of other stuff. And also, so that what I'm really interested in the way that you're approaching it is how do we get these kind of paraprofessional trained men who are given some resources, but we don't cross that line into becoming yet another professional group. Yeah. Can you see avenues for doing this as we move forward with this idea?
I can, and it's something that we're going to maybe talk about in a few minutes as a subject for a possible discussion at the summit that we're going to be having next year. So I'll come back to that in a moment if that's all right, but I wanted to just flag I've just put a link to the report that Glenn Poole from the MHF and we did as part of our submission to the suicide prevention strategy. And one of the things, well, there's a bunch of info in there. So that link is to a page on the AMHF website. You have to scroll down to find the actual report. But there's a really great 8 or so pages in there, which clearly explains, shows the data about why we need to be thinking differently about men. It shows that in Tassie, up to 4 out of 5 recipients of our suicide prevention services are women. So it shows really clearly that the services are not doing, they're not got their right focus. So I just want to share that with you because I think, like for you, Paul, up in the Northwest, sometimes it's the data that needs to be, the data is what sometimes connects for people. They need to be supported with stories as well and our lived experience, but sometimes it's the data that jolts people into listening. Yeah.
And good topics. And look, we got to unpack a lot of this for a lot longer, but we're going to move into something which is pretty cool. And that's basically just trying to identify some topics like JB was just talking about for the summit. And one of the other things which sort of was just touched on then is like the voice of the lived experience and getting the representation. JB and I had a chat today about like what we can possibly do with this group, like in terms of moving forward and how we can really become more recognized within the space. So one of them is obviously whether or not we get to a place where we invite government departments and places to actually connect with us to review policy and have an overlook on certain things moving forward as the men's lived experience representative across this country. So yeah, there's a lot of things in the space that we're sort of working towards in the background, but we'll keep you posted on that. And it'd be great to have that as something for not only for us as a platform to connect together, but also for the country to have a place to come and connect with men that are in the sector and are representing the voices of people in their communities. So yeah, we'll keep you posted on that. JB, all right. How do you want to do this next part? I've just found the questions. Cool.
Yeah. So just to give people a bit of perspective, we've got the men's lived experience, or there's the lived experience summit that Roses in the Ocean is running in Tassie in March. I think it's around the 9th, 10th of March, something like
March
that.
9 and 10.
Yep.
And Eddie, you're on the spot. Is that the dates?
Yep. And we'll double check that before we finish. But we've got an opportunity to have at least one, probably two sessions within that, just focusing on this network. And so we're really interested if you guys have any particular topics. We've got a few ideas, but we'd love to hear from you first rather than just putting our ideas out there in that true community development collaborative style. What would you like to see happen at that summit if you were able to be there? Hopefully you can. But what are the issues you think we need to chat about? What would you like to receive or participate in as somebody at a session like that? It's not necessarily about getting presenters in, it's about doing something together.
Mm. And to actually follow on from that, it's about the summit is going to be a starting point. And I know that from Roses in the Ocean's perspective, like Bronwyn has said, whatever we build at the summit, it's something that we want to put into a project and develop and evolve. So actually do something with it, not just have a discussion and let it sit there, have a discussion and let that be the base, and then let's go with it and see what we can do. Jason.
Yeah, I've just been having a look in the background at that Resources Tasmania, which looks pretty cool. I guess you mentioned there about mentoring programs, that type of thing. I think information around how we can grow that in our communities, I think is because having those, being able to give people the skills to be those positive role models in community, because we're really looking at it in our region as that this is a community thing. We can't keep waiting for government funding and different things. So it's very much about trying to empower community, and the more awareness and skills we can build in community, then the stronger the community is going to be.
Yeah.
Pat, over to you.
Yeah, no, I was just agreeing with Jason there. Like, I'd love to see some kind of a camp, like a awareness campaign around it. But also like the opportunity. I'm hoping to get down to Tassie with Standby. I'm hoping to find out in the next week or two if it's happening. But yeah, I'd love the opportunity to have like a brainstorming session where we can all kind of come together and kind of look at talking about some kind of nature-based therapies and maybe something like a men's camp or something like that, where we can kind of really get together as men and talk about what's going on, and that being feeling like a safe space where you can be vulnerable and you can open up and talk, and you don't need to sit in a room opposite someone who's got a framed certificate on the wall. You know what I mean? Like, and yeah, just get a bit real. So
Yeah, that sounds good. I feel I have to let you know that the days of the summit precede the Tasmanian Men's Gathering, which is 3 days in the wilds a little bit.
Wow.
With about 70 odd blokes. It's pretty powerful. One of the best things I've ever done in the men's space. And yeah, if you can extend a couple of days, I'd highly
it'd be
recommend it.
unreal.
John Eddie.
How good would that
definitely
be
have-
everywhere?
Glenn, over to you, mate.
Cheers, right. I'd be interested. I mean, I desperately think that we do need that ability to get people, especially to get men together. But I'm always sort of curious as to how we're able to run programs to suit everybody. And I think we've talked about this before, that what works in metropolitan areas or in sort of more populated areas don't work in regional areas. And I think we've got to figure out ways that we can get to our, regional and rural men. And, for us down here, the majority of our population is farm based. And, I've had conversations with groups who talk about having yoga days and these retreats and that. And look, the farmers and that just won't walk off the property to come and do them. We've got to find ways. And one of the most successful things I've seen run down here was after the fires in 2020, and they got involved with one of the working dog groups, and they brought working dog demonstrations into some of the regional areas. So that literally brought all of the farmers and everything together because they wanted to see how the dogs work. And that gave us an opportunity to actually get, men of the land in and sit down and talk.
That's, to me,
Yeah,
that's the thing, is finding what is it they will go to. Don't try and get them to come to our thing.
Yeah.
We need to go to what they set up. And so there's a couple of organisations running things that more in that line. Are You Bogged, Mate? You might have heard of. That's just one off the top, but there's probably other things, and we've had different people in the network as well speak about some of their activities.
And Glenn, on that topic as well, one of the things that is happening here with Rose in the Ocean is Lifeline have engaged with us, and they want us to collaborate with them and do something with men in rural, remote regions. And so we're looking to, it was meant to happen this month, but we've pushed it back because we wanted to co-design it better. So there's going to be opportunity for face-to-face, but we're also going to want to connect with people whatever way we can. So I'll throw that out to the network once we have it available. And if we as a network, if we can pull men in, we don't want services, we want actual men that have lived and we want to have conversations with them, whatever platform it is, like whether or not we pick up the phone or we go somewhere. So once that happens, and Lifeline have said, we want to do something, and whatever it looks like, they've got no predetermined idea, but they're open to be driven by men and men's lived experience and their input.
Yeah, I think that's really necessary. I do a lot of work with some of our local cricket clubs down here, and I guess the difference for us down here, when our clubs we have a cricket conversation day, we don't do sausages on a barbecue. One of the boys will knock over a sheep and they'll put a sheep on a spit. So it's just a different mentality as to how they want to sit and talk.
Sure.
When's the next spit, Glenn? Can I come invite?
3rd of December. Next cricket.
I'm coming down. Just send the address.
Coming down, yes. I was blown away the first time I was invited to go along to one of these, and they said, we'll do a barbie. And I thought, yeah, okay. Sausage sandwiches. And I got down there and they got this bloody great sheep on a spit. And one of the local bakers had just knocked up a couple of dozen little damper rolls. So, we keep saying to people, we're not hillbillies. We actually do it pretty good.
John Eddie, over to you, buddy.
I'll dispute that you're not a hillbilly, Glenn, but let's not do that now. So that's a conversation for another day. I've lost my train of thought now. Oh, the summit's on the 9th and the 10th of March. So, but I'd like to see guys like us get into kids at school and have conversations really with them. You know, I've done it a couple of times, and you know, give them a no holds barred question session and fire us questions about suicide, and obviously in a safe environment. And I've done it a couple of times, and both times I've had kids stand up and say they've been thinking about it. It works. It's pretty powerful stuff, especially if you've got people on the other side that are okay to answer these questions.
That sounds really powerful. And yeah, I'm actually super impressed with, is that in Busselton?
Yeah, we did it. It was through a church group, which I was sort of a bit reluctant about to start with. And we had all their parents in the room as well. We had about 14 kids from 12 up to about 16. And both occasions, we had 2 kids stand up and seek help. You know, asking me and another bereaved father, and we just gave them full access to ask these tricky questions, which is obviously extremely difficult for both sides to sit there and do that. But geez, it was bloody powerful. That's sort of, that's what really showed me the power of our lived experience story here when used properly. And kids, I believe kids have the answer. You know, we start educating these kids young. They're going to take that through into adulthood, obviously, teach their mates as well.
Thanks, mate. That's great. Tony, over to you.
Yeah, I'd like to build on that last piece. It always strikes me that in community development, if we don't actually have the people who are at the sharp end of any particular group with a problem, then we don't have a solution. So if we're working on the problem with ex-prisoners, then can we have a program that actually trains ex-prisoners to take a leadership role in terms of dealing with it? And we've got an example of this with Justice Action in New South Wales, where we actually train 25 ex-prisoners as mentors of others. If we're going to do it with young people, can we engage them, but also empower them to have ownership of a leadership role in terms of driving this thing forward? And could we make that a theme in a sense that kind of runs through this summit? The challenge is, how do we get the people who are at the sharp end to become part of the solution rather than a welfare model, which is some other group from the outside trying to solve their problems for them? How we do that, I don't know. I can offer a few ideas of bits and pieces based on past experience, but I'd love to see how other people come to an event like that saying, well, these are the challenges, this is the difficulty we've had actually getting this engagement, this ownership of a leadership role in terms of defining what is to be done. I just offer that as a thought for running through. That's what I'd like to see raised within this summit.
That's brilliant. Thanks for your comments, Tony. Paul, you're on mute.
I was just going to scream out meatloaf. Thank you, John. You took the words right out of my mouth. I am a passionate believer in getting into our kids' heads early. Prevention rather than intervention and post-mention. I did a lot of workshops a few years ago, locally here in Bundaberg, with disengaged youth and kids with, or people with disabilities and all the rest. And just being able to put workshops together, talking about emotional intelligence, what it is. Kids don't understand their emotions. They've got no idea how to manage those things. And with all of the extra demands of social media and peer group pressure and all this other stuff that goes on, especially the males, they're on a course to be flogged every single time because they've just got no one to talk to. And you throw in the whole family environment, they don't have those role models to turn to. And I do a reasonable amount of mentoring work up here for other males, both formally and informally. And the amount, I've lost count of the amount of times that parents have said to me, my God, that the couple of hours you spent with us, this couple of hours you spent with our child, we've gotten more out of that hour than we've gotten out of 3 to 6 years of working with a psychologist, because you talk from the heart, you talk from lived experience, you've walked in those shoes, you're not a bloody textbook, you're not there telling the kid, you're listening with these two, but you're challenging them with what you have been through, what it was like for you, and say, hey, you know, how's that working for you? Because I can tell you, it didn't work for me. And so it's much more of a conversation. So for me, I would love to, for us, yeah, at that conference, and we don't even have to wait till then, but work on how we can actually get into the education systems to allow the lived experience males to work with these kids, empower these kids to actually own the whole process. We'll just sit in the background and guide and support and help, but yeah, empower especially the males to actually take ownership of what's happening in their own lives out there. Because if we can do that from an early age, then we've hopefully cut short and reduce the numbers that are going to suffer with mental health, that are going to suffer with suicide ideation, and most terribly, you know, take that next step. So for me, that is a personal area that I'm passionate about, that I would love to see the combined heads of not just here, but you know, from a greater audience. How do we get into the schools and get over the political correctness and get the lived experience males in front of these kids? Because I know when you talk to them, they open up, because they know that you're coming from the same space.
Yeah. Great. Sounds like there's some good energy for that stuff, Tony.
Yeah. Glenn.
Yeah, I just like with this sort of talk about us being real men. I remember a couple of years ago I was invited, and I do a bit with TAFE courses up and down the coast. We call it the Great TAFE Tour at times. And I do sort of Bega, Cooma, Maria, Ulladulla, so they're spread right up and down the east coast down here. But I was doing a presentation to Ulladulla TAFE, to a lot of their hospitality kids and different groups. So I rode up. It's about a 200k run, but it was beautiful. It was in summer, so I rode a motorcycle up and didn't give it a second thought, but talked to the kids, and it was a real mix of kids and young men and women. But the following year when I went back, the organizer said, you don't realise the impact you had last year just because you rode up. And I sort of looked at him and said, what do you mean? He said, well, the simple fact that they watched, and let's be honest, I've got a head like a bash crab. I'm not attractive. I've got tattoos. I've got multiple earrings, beard, whatever. They said the simple fact that this, you know, big, ugly fella rode in on his big black motorcycle and then stood there and talked to us about mental health. Out of that, 2 of the kids decided they didn't want to do hospitality anymore. They signed up to do their degrees in social work. Because all of a sudden, he said in their own words, there was an actual real person talk to us.
Yeah.
And made it so it was all right for us. And yes, John, and a hillbilly, and proud of it. My friend, I take you as my inspiration. But it does come back to being real, you know, in their eyes, real people talking to them.
Absolutely.
You know, and as I said, look, I've done the dumb things. You know, ex-bikie, ex-bouncer, ex-truck driver, whatever else, you name it, I've done it. You know, and if you think about doing it, talk to me, because I'll tell you what your downfalls are. You know, at the end of the day, and I did a youth group with kids between 14 and 18, and there was about 60 of them. And I talked with the team leaders and said, look, we're going to be talking about suicide and suicide prevention. What do you want me to say? And the team leaders just said, just talk to us like we're adults. And stop being politically correct. Talk to us like adults. We want to know. And we want you to talk to us like equals. And that's the thing. And they responded. And I made them cry. They made me cry. And at the end of the 2 days, it was just magic. You know? But
awesome.
Yeah. We've just got to be real.
Exactly.
Definitely. Thanks, Glenn. Jason, did your hand go up? Did you have some comments?
Oh, the moment passed. It's
Okay. Awesome. Look, thank you for your input. And to be honest, all your suggestions are different to the ones that we already had. And I'm just wondering, JB, if we can get a chance to perhaps send an email out to you guys. Maybe I need to come back to Bronny on Tuesday, so we need to get an answer pretty soon. But maybe if we can collate and send out an email, and if we can just get feedback on what you guys like as a collective, what you'd like to see, and yeah, we'll figure out how that'll look. But we'll try and get an email out Wednesday, probably Thursday or Friday.
Yeah. Yeah, we might name up the other topics that we've got as well. I think there's a bit of crossover there, Tynan. That's not completely different.
Can you spit them out
Some
quickly?
different.
So
What's that?
Can you spit them out quickly?
sure. We had the role of self-reliance and males wanting to do it themselves. We had, is having thoughts of suicide wrong? What are the protective factors in acknowledging thoughts of suicide are present, and how are these protective? We had, how do we get away from pushing services on men to focus on supporting men?
Which I think is what a lot of what we've talked about, and we talked a little bit about mapping, what are the different types of support. It doesn't have to be services, it's different types of grassroots connection. To me, there's a continuum from one end, two mates, up to the other end, clinical, and there's all this stuff in between which we can identify.
Yeah. And then the other one I had down here, JB, or maybe I wrote this one myself, was what role does acknowledging and leaving thoughts of suicide on the table play in preventing men taking their own lives?
Yeah. I reckon we should collate those and the ones that have
Definitely.
been named up, and just flick out an email to the network, possibly with as a little survey. How much how interested in each of these topics would you be, or prioritize which would be the most interesting to you.
Yeah, look, we'll get that out by the end of the week, so if you guys can keep an eye out for it.